Hi everyone. Welcome. Thank you for bearing with us as we got set up. And thank you all for joining us today for this conversation with Mona Jimenez and Brian Castriota. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mona and Brian very shortly, but I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping details from our side at Lux first, before handing over to them. So this event is the first in our series of online lectures as part of our Shaping Strategies Caring for Moving Image in the Margins program, which is supported by the BFI Screen Heritage Fund, which is awarding national lottery funding. That's a bit of a mouthful. The program will be taking place over the next few months and provide a platform for archivists, conservators, researchers, and artist filmmakers to share their community-led practices and how they often work in informal, under-resourced, or under-recognized settings. There will be some time for you to ask any questions you may have to Mona and Brian at the end of the event. So please feel free to send any questions on the chat, or if you're watching on YouTube, on the comments as we go. And then I will ask as many as we have time for at the end. So please feel free to put them in as we go. We also have Kate joining us to provide live captioning, which you should be able to view as you watch. In a second, I'll also post a link to a separate web page where you can also see the captions, scroll back, and adjust the font size if that's something that you would prefer to have access to. So, with all of that out of the way, I'm very happy to introduce Mona and Brian. Mona Jimenez began using video in 1974 for creative and social justice projects and is a longtime preservationist, educator, and organizer dedicated to participatory and cross-disciplinary models for media archiving and preservation. She initiated the models for Audiovisual Preservation Exchange, APEX, and community archiving workshops, both of which you'll be hearing more about shortly. From 2003 to 2017, she taught at the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation Program at New York University, leading curriculum development for video preservation, collection management, and media art conservation. She currently teaches media conservation at Elias Caretakers Escola and trains activists to use media to document human rights abuses. Mona will then be in conversation with Brian Castriota, who is a lecturer in conservation of contemporary art and media at UCL, and time-based media conservator at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. From 2018 to 2026, he was time-based media conservator at the National Gallery Scotland, where he established their time-based media conservation infrastructure and procedures. Brian has published widely on conservation theory and practice, and his scholarship has examined how ideas from post-structuralism, queer theory, agential realism, and feminist and anti-colonial critique rework sedimented practices of conservation, particularly in relation to contemporary art, its musealization, and its documentation for conservation purposes. His current research practice explores conservation as a practice of relational world making and reparative justice and the diverse forms it might take. And with that, I'll hand over to Mona to take the floor.
Whoop, there I am. Thank you, Siavash. Thank you so much. And welcome everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I've been a big fan of Lux for many years, and I'm just happy to be with all of you. And I want to say thank you to Siavash, to Lux, to Siavash, and to Brian and Pip Lawrence and Charlotte Proctor, who also helped me conceptualize this. So I'm going to share a screen. To put it in slideshow mode here. Okay, great. So first thing I want to do is just go to the second slide here and show this slide. I think one of the reasons probably that I was asked to do this is because of this essay that came out in this book on conservation of time-based media art that came out. That's edited by Dina Engel and Joanna Phillips. It came out in 2023. In that essay, myself and Kristen McDonough and Martha Singer talked about three different initiatives. As Sebastian was saying, the Apex Audiovisual Preservation Exchange, Community Archiving Workshops, and Transfer Collective, XFR Collective. I'm going to talk about the first two today, and I bring this up not so much to toot my own horn here, but just to say that and in the process of doing this essay, we had roundtables with those three groups. And so when you read the essay, you get a lot more information than I can convey. And of course, I've been involved with both of those projects, but they've also taken off into all kinds of expanded forms that I had nothing to do with. So I really feel like if you want to understand a little bit more from the point of view of people who are organizing, that's a good place to start. And then, of course, maybe reaching out to them as well. So hopefully you can, I don't know, ask your library to buy it, maybe, or get it through interlibrary loan, who knows? Okay, so I'm going to talk, well, let me say just a little bit also about my own background. I started using video in 1974 with the Portapak, which I'm sure was the first portable video format that took off. Prior to that, all you could do was work in broadcast television, and of course that was very homogenous. So in all the ways you can think of what homogenous might mean. So I came up, as a person who was making media at a time when a lot of media art centers were being formed. A lot of the arts councils and funding for media and film had just started. And also obviously a time of, where we were all being challenged for what now is trying to be destroyed in the U.S., diversity, inclusion, equity. And also there was an ethos about sharing information, each one teach one, working together like sort of a non-expert, being able to find solutions without having experts always telling us that. So I think that those are some of the ways that I was kind of grounded in, just in general, in terms of how I thought about my own practice. I mean, there were, the civil rights movements were taking off, and we were, in the US, just beyond the stage of the Civil Rights Act. So it's like, okay, how are we actually making things manifest, And so media was definitely part of that. And all the tool sharing and things that come from that. So I feel very indebted. Well, I feel indebted to everybody they've worked with, but I also feel very indebted to that grounding. And so I like to say more and more, and I was working in legal services and housing work and all these other things also when I was doing media work. So I feel more and more like I'm an organizer and an artist who ended up in academia. So I think like an organizer, and I think that is reflected in the work that I have done. And so anyway, I think we'll get into that more as time goes by. So I first want to talk about APEX, Audiovisual Preservation Exchange, which started around 2008, 2009, I would say. And you can see from this slide, these on the right-hand side, these are all these different projects. You can open them and you can, see what they were all about. And I'm going to talk about some of the history, but you can see from the beginning that it started with work in Ghana. So I was working, as my bio had said, in the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program, and I was asked by a colleague in Africana Studies, he was in Africana Studies and Theater, to go to Ghana because there were some people interested in starting an archive. So I ended up going with a another person, sorry, I just need to get this open again. Caravan Olson, who was just had graduated from EF. And we went like 7 times over 8 years, I think, something like that. So at least 7 or 8 times. So I remember sitting in the train station trying to get funding from my university to go, and I was trying to think of the name of of this initiative, and and I thought I just kept playing, and finally I came up with Audiovisual Preservation Exchange because I knew that I didn't want to go there as an expert coming from a resource country, all the history of colonialism and all that kind of stuff. And I tried to think, and was interested as a community organizer and how to communicate, how do communities, reach whatever it is that they're working on in terms of their practice, and also knowing that employing that sort of each one teach one, we're all learners and teachers, that there's plenty for us to exchange and for us to learn from each other and to adjust practices. And so we would like to say in Apex that we're not archivists without borders. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not our point of view. So that's where that kind of came from. And we always try to think about how we can make exchange be, real, true exchange happen in the process. By the way, I saw a friend of mine from Argentina in the audience, and maybe there's more, but so it's nice to see you, Leonardo. Anyway, so we were asked to come. We basically met with a whole bunch of people and were asked to come back and do some training, and we ended up bringing in some other people, somebody from Australia, and this is Ismail Zinyangri, who was at the time, I think, he was on the east coast of Africa. I'm trying to remember, not in Kenya, perhaps. Anyway, he so we did for 3 years a series of different types of trainings and workshops, and work together with people on their collections. And then what we kind of were a little flummoxed because the people we were training really didn't have much power. And so we were trying to figure out what to do and how to, again, understand what was needed on the ground and what we could work on together. And then we met someone from the Nketia archives in the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. And so it sort of it was a small number of people working over a long period of time, kind of to move toward some type of more permanent preservation environment. We ended up in the end co-creating this audio preservation lab. So Caravan Melson's there, she's the blonde, and then Judith Opoko Botang was our main contact with the Scotch tape, and then some of the other people that were working in the archive. And so that was a long-term project, and it was actually going on right up until 2014. So CAW and the Apex were sort of happening at the same time. Some of the other things that we did were public events like this that what were organized. This is Chris Sese, who was the first Ghanaian cinematographer. There's just been a documentary made about him, and he's really wonderful. And he's speaking in front of these home movies that included Nkrumah. And we found some things in the States that could be preserved in the States in order to have there be some promotion in Ghana of what preservation is and so on. So we we kind of went with what the community needed and worked, side by side, as I say. Here's a keynote that Kara did at the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archive Conference. And so if you wanted, there's slides that you can look at there, and she summarizes it, and then you can look at the slides and talks about that project that we did over those years. And then there was a little bit of I was just working in Ghana, and then Dan Strebel actually collaborated with El Museo del Cine in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And he did a kind of a crowdsourcing, we called it Apex, and he did kind of a crowdsourcing thing where people were at a conference for International Federation of Film Archives, and we were very close to the director and staff of the Museo. And so these people came and worked at the Museo. And I think that was like a transitional moment and a kind of an inspirational moment about how larger teams might work together. And again, exchanging practices, but working together side by side on a collection. And then I feel like things really took off in 2013 when Juana Suarez, who's now the director of MIAP, organized, I would say. I was at that point, we decided to mentor students to plan and carry out the an event. And this Juana really brought it to a new level. She was Colombian. She really had a lot of contacts. She was coming from an academic background back to MIAP, and just really opened and expanded the idea of what could be done. And so this kind of model of going for 2 to 3 weeks with teams, with people, usually students from MIAP, a couple of times students from other places, a couple of faculty, and sometimes a couple of our experts, and working again side by side with our colleagues in collections. And this one, we were primarily at the Fundación. When I say that things got expanded, Juana also, she just knew everybody, and she also arranged for a personal digital archiving workshop to be done at and that was delivered by the students at a bookstore. And we also had a visit with a filmmaker, and we also, had a lot, I think, to a lab. And so there was just a broadening. But basically, this was the idea, is that we break up into teams, in this case, just mainly one institution, and work on these different collections. So we had both team members together. And so I get it for a lot of credit for having moved us in that direction. And here's some pictures from that the first one. And I don't know who's who, but I can tell you that we're all problem solving there and working on collections. And there's some very significant work that was done on, there was a documentary series called Yurapari, I believe is the name of it. And that, as a result of some work that was done there was preservation of those films, important films. So, but this was kind of the beginning of this kind of team, short-term, but the team approach. And as time went by, and there were workshops also. There were workshops at that, where there would be co-led. I think there was one on digital preservation that was co-led by one of our faculty members with somebody in the library and archives world there. But we ended up incorporating more workshops, either by our team, the team from the US, or a team from the other country that we were in. Mostly we were in other countries, except for the colony of Puerto Rico, where we were, which is, part of the US. So, so here you see, this is in Cartagena, Spain, and they Pamela Wiesner there on the left had developed this kit. We were inspired by some of the work that the CAW had done in putting together a film inspection kit, and we wanted to do a video digitization kit. So it demos digitization as the key components, and then you add a deck, and you add a computer, and you add a hard drive, and some monitors, and you end up. So doing this kind of workshops also became a big part of APEX. Also, in Santiago, Chile, this is the studio here of Señal Tres La Victoria, which is a community or pirate television station in a low power television station in a community in Santiago. And so one of the things we did was, because they were all, obviously talk about exchange, very technically savvy, so we kind of worked together to try to bring some of the elements together to create a digitization station. It was a very exciting moment. You can see one tape here with of their logo. And it's just a really wonderful place to work. And one of the other things that, I think we'll talk a little bit more after I get through this with the strategies about the process. But basically with Apex, we had conversations with a couple of key people and Juana Suarez was incredible for this because her thesis involved kind of the state of archives in Latin America. So she had met with tons of people about what was happening. So she had contacts, and for all of even though other people were key organizers, other students, she had since graduated, were key organizers for some Apex in the future. We'd start with somebody that she knew, or somebody that one of the students from Latin America knew. And this was this group called, it's a contemporary arts center. And they had, so one of the teams, and what they did was they collected home movies, and artists used the home movies, and they also did, so the artists could use the home movies in their work with the permission of the families, and they also sent them back, after having been inspected and talking about preservation. So it's kind of an artist access educational type of thing that was happening. And this was what they call their archival jam improvisation. And the students were projecting the films in this big space with multiple rooms. It was really, so, we worked, all the things I've mentioned so far, documentary, we did newsreels, and there's a network of non-commercial or non-broadcast, I guess you'd say, types of media and film, people that collected across Spain, and we worked with that group. So there's a lot of different types of material, some ethnographic, and in Ghana, which I failed to mention, the name of the archive is the Kwabena Nketia Archive. And Nketia was one of the first ethnomusicologists in the world, and we think the first ethnomusicologist in Africa. So his collection was the basis, as we're holding those tapes outside, maybe much to Kara's dismay that we were outside posing with them. But in any case, they very significant music and other kinds of audio, traditions. Just recently in Guadalajara, these were two publications that came out. So one of the things that happens with Apex is that in the Apex in Latin America, for sure, was that maybe there was one in Argentina, then maybe there was one in Uruguay, then there's one in or Colombia, then Uruguay, then or Argentina, Colombia, Uruguay, and Cartagena, Spain. So and that's not Latin America, but you get the drift, that people would come to who had been partners in other places to come to be participants in the next APEX. So that's something cool that would happen. And then we found that over time we were starting to incorporate, we were also starting to incorporate the CAW into the program before APEX. So this is an example of a CAW we did we were in Puerto Rico on the mainland, and we went to Vieques, and this was a follow-up community archiving workshop. I love this because we have here intergenerational community archiving happening. It's the only picture I've ever seen of that young person organizing the cassettes to be inventoried. So let me tell you about APEX about CAW, so you can have some context here. So community archiving workshop is a model whereby usually just one day, usually somewhere between 10 and 30 people come together around a collection. Often it does include archivists, it might include the owners of the collection, other allies, students, filmmakers, whoever wants to come. And again, sort of working side by side and having this exchange of skills and content, which is often part of it. And so I'm here in Buffalo, New York right now, and there's a truck here from the National African American Museum. They'd have a digitization truck, and they did a call last week, and they said they only had 10 people, but they did 160. They inventoried 160 pieces of media. So basically what this is to help organizations get some intellectual and physical control over the collections to jumpstart preservation. So when we do a community archiving workshop, if I'm there, usually at the end, I say, okay, great. We did a lot of work today, but it's not about making beautiful boxes or nice labels. What if somebody walked through the door just now and said, I want to do 25 tapes. Which ones can I fund? And so the inventory, we know as archivists, those archivists know that data we collect in making an inventory, a computer inventory, which we do in a spreadsheet, is the first step to being able to do digitization, which is basically saving it. So we know that we can use the same unique ID as the file name. We know we're getting, so basically what you're doing there is collecting all the information off the physical object, putting it into an inventory. And I'll show you this rather than talking about it. But anyway, Community Archiving Workshop is a fantastic initiative where, again, like I haven't been involved for maybe 3 years, and I was involved mostly in training of trainers. So we started out with doing workshops in association with the Association of Moving Image Archivists, which has an annual conference. And so we would organize one around the conference. And that is still happening through something called the CAW Working Group. There's kind of two entry points now. There's a CAW Working Group at the Association of Moving Image Archivists, and they train every year people to organize. So these are people who are doing a training of trainers and carrying out a CAW at the conference. And then there's the CAW Collective, which is now becoming a nonprofit. And so you can become part of that stream and learn more. But also there's a lot of resources for people who want to just do their own, which is always something that was on our mind from the very first start of doing these workshops. So you can see here, like this is Oaxaca on your left, where we did one inside and one outside. And this is on the right is the Georgia Historical Society, which was working with a youth media group called All Walks of Life. And I remember going to the restroom at that place and running into a woman who was now one of the youth media people. And she was weeping because she said, I haven't seen this material. I was a teenager when I learned to make media, and I haven't seen this since that time. I mean, it's very significant for people to have access, as you know, to media. Here are some other pictures, just of the kind of work so people would be doing. I think the first one on the left is where they're trying to inventory. I mean, they're borrowing the collection, so they're trying to make a record of it before they take it to the CAW. The one in the middle is a history center. So there was some funny stuff there, like they had a PSA, public service announcement, like competition every year. And the one on the right is in Pittsburgh. And I think this is one of the first times we were working with more digital assets. So not DVDs and CDs, but also things on thumb drives and hard drives. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and Siavash is going to share this video. So this is Manila. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. This is Manila, 2017.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community Archiving Workshop, Manila. In behalf of all the organizers, we would like to thank everyone for coming here. So thank you very much. We're going to be here for an entire day. We're going to have fun, we're going to learn things, we're going to be able to do a lot of things for EPA Foundations and the Asia Visions collection. Bruce has been working on the Asia Visions collection for almost a decade, or more.
Archives are part of our collective memory. Asia Visions doesn't 100% cover all of what happened in the Philippines during the period that they tried documenting what happened, but definitely it's one block or two blocks contributing to that societal collective memory. So it's about a fight against historical revisionism, about collective amnesia for social justice when the archive is stopped.
We're putting out the barcodes for the labels. It's pretty good. Cool.
Monday and Tuesday. So here we are inspecting a tape, checking its condition, making sure that there's nothing wrong with it, or if there is something wrong with it, figuring out what is the problem with the tape, and then we're recording the vital information from the tape into our database here.
And we're taking notes of the conditions of the case and the housing as well as the tape, and noting down everything that is everything from the title, if there is a title.
We have a title authority list that was created based on the filmography and research done by Professor Rocket. However, if they come upon a tape with a title that is not part of the title authority list, they call it out. Rose goes there, verifies if it's a new title. If it's a new title, it goes on the board for everyone's reference.
That old idea of archivists as neutral gatekeepers in hard to access institutions. I liked that this just was a completely different, and I had no idea that this world existed.
It's really exciting to see, that you don't have to be alone.
See how quickly we can marshal ourselves to get something done, really. And everybody took on what they need to take on. So you're going to go out there and do good work. Yeah, I know it. It's a privilege for you to be here. So I know that was hard to hear because they didn't use mics when they did that, and maybe if you're on a soft screen, it's hard to read, but you can always go watch it again, and I think hopefully you get the general sense of these things are really fun to do. They're like really fun, and it's a real sense of accomplishment to get something done. Now, a lot of this was in this is Bono Elgato, and he's on the faculty of the library school. So he facilitated and it was in conjunction with the Southeast Asian Pacific Audiovisual Archiving Association conference. So it was like officially within that. Okay, I'm going to go quickly, now that you've seen the gist of that, through some of the resources. And I want to say that, again, like there has been a tremendous expansion of the CAW, and it's really exciting. And there are many projects I have had nothing to do with. So I think you're going to want to really explore and reach out to find out everything that's happening. So we started out with this handbook, and that was the first effort we kind of started it, and then we ended up, as we developed more documentation of the various CAWs and the various forms and resources that were developed, we did the website and put it up there. See, you can download the handbook. One of the things, as I said, we started thinking about right away is how can we get more people doing these? And so we got money from a couple of funders. I want to say the IMLS and library folks, and perhaps the NEH. And the first thing we did was have these 3 regional projects, where in the West, the Southeast, and the Midwest, and where facilitators worked with different organizations and trained their staff. So it was very specific to their staff. And then we worked with the National African American Museum, myself and another person, and trained people from the Smith Center there at the Smithsonian in the museum to organize CAWs. And then as a result of that, we wrote this kind of generic curriculum. So there's fully trainer's notes, everything. It's, something to explore. A couple of projects they've done is this audiovisual collections care and tribal archives. And when you go to the site, you can see the various different groups, nations that have been, tribes that have been worked with over that. And that also generated a ton of information, more documentation information. One of the things that I love is they developed also a kit for video digitization, audio digitization, and film inspection. And this is a really wonderful, I just think a wonderful design of this, how to put it together and what it does. And they also worked with, I think there was a library in Wisconsin to expand out their digital readiness curriculum to include AV materials. So there's a self-assessment. I've done a lot with trying to, because, realizing that you can't just do the workshops. You've got to do, there's more to, people want to digitize, and then there's a whole lot to learn about that. So let's see, do I have anything else? I think that could be it, or else my computer is being slow. Doesn't seem to want to go to the next page. So there might be something I'm missing there, but please take a look at those things. So anyway, I realize I've talked mostly about strategies, and now I know Brian has some questions for me, and hopefully we'll still have some time to take some questions. And so so let's just go there, and then we can see what else needs to happen.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much,
Hi.
Mona. That was so wonderful to hear you speak so candidly about your work. And just to also give a sense of what this, I guess, kind of preservation looks like, and can look like outside of institutional contexts. So I guess to start, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the process of adapting and translating preservation principles and scaling practices, I guess, to different contexts. Because it was really interesting to see how you were connecting up with local resources and infrastructures like the pirate television stations, and I guess the importance of mapping what exists locally and regionally. And so it got me thinking about how this kind of work can actually be made sustainable, how some aspects may align with what we refer to as best practices, but also how some aspects may necessarily have to deviate when adapting them to particular settings in order to be more achievable and sustainable. So I guess I'm wondering if you talk about the challenges of establishing or adhering to a baseline in these different contexts and settings, and whether that's really the right way to even be thinking about it.
Well, it's interesting because lately I've been actually talking to organizers in other fields and how hard it is, or how, not hard, it's not challenging, to train people to negotiate about what the two partners are doing. So it's a lot easier when it's organization to organization. Like, for example, well, I'll just take the example of Santiago, where we worked with the Biblioteca Nacional. So that was like, they have all of their own systems. They have their own, metadata. They have the, everything, but they have a lot of collections. And also one of the great things we learned there was they turned us on to like a little time-based corrector that we didn't know about, so, but so you might be working with, and they did have film and media experience. So it was, I remember one of the things being, oh, this is how we modify projectors to capture small gauge film. But the other one was Señal Tres, which I almost showed the video from that today, but I didn't. This community television station, and they had lots and lots of tapes. They had lots and lots of expertise with technology, but not a lot in terms of how do you go from maybe a paper list to a computer, and how do you incorporate digitization within that. So, I think that sometimes it's super simple. I mean, well, so that negotiation, and we found this with the CAW too, right? That people need to, if somebody's organizing a CAW, they need to work with the organization about how do they collect information and how can we maintain what they collect, but also how can we change some things in order to conform more with best practices. But best practices, for example, on an inventory are like, why do we collect descriptive information? Well, we do it because we want to find out what the content is. Why do we collect technical information? Well, we do that because we have to transfer the tape. So we have to know, does it fit in this machine or does it fit in that machine? Or why do we collect administrative? Like, oh, because we want to be able to find the box. So I feel like sometimes it's just a process of slowing down and using different language. And then, but then there are things where I got all this information I want to incorporate into this spreadsheet. And, you have to work with people to say, yeah, let's incorporate that. How can we incorporate it? Just so there's if you ever go to a database, or if you want to work in a portal, these are some of the things you might think about in terms of naming the column in the spreadsheet. So I think a lot of it is listening. And sometimes I'm trying to remember, because I think in Pittsburgh, we were working with the Queer Archive, and I think they were not that interested for the CAW, not really that interested in having an archive per se, but then they became a partner in the digital readiness thing. So I think, I think it's sometimes, again, explaining like, why do we even archive, and how can we protect maybe people, how can we make sure that we're not imposing?
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to teach. It's a hard thing to teach in the training of trainers. You have to negotiate a template for the CAW. And it's a really hard thing to teach. It's kind of confounding. It's sort of like, well, that's the best way to teach it. And we all do the best we can to get to that space. Sometimes we're better than others in terms of coming out with an outcome where people can find things. Because, they knew that box was the fourth one up from that stack. So it really depends on the situation. But I think, why do we do it is like one of the key questions. And then maybe it's more acceptable. And how can we incorporate what you have into here?
Mhm. I mean, that kind of leads into my next question, which was, I guess, given how you've collaborated with folks working in very different cultural geographies, I'm wondering if you could just speak about the practical realities of navigating and affirming all those cultural differences. So you spoke about, I think, about the concerns of reenacting colonial logics. You talked about the ethos of mutual exchange and also long-term investment and relationship building that's so central.
Mhm.
So I was thinking about, what happens when we go from the ideal and the abstract to that concrete reality of working with communities and collections that have not just, I guess, very different resources and local knowledge, but also
Yeah.
in some cases, like quite violent and painful histories and relationships with practices of collection and care and taxonomy. Um, and that it highlights the importance of cultural safety in the work we do. So maybe if you could just speak a bit more about what you think that cultural sort of calibration looks like in this kind of work, or what
Mhm.
it might look like.
Well, I mean, there are some very specific things, right? Which I think that, for example, the working with uh, the tribal collections probably address, which I know of just from working in Australia and working and knowing that the incorporating kind of the indigenous practices or the restrictions in a lot of cases in Australia into into the work and what's restricted in terms of cultural uh, activity, what is only seen by certain people and those kinds of things. I think there's good work being done on that. I would say that in our situation, I think that we didn't really know what exchange meant when we went to Ghana, but we always tried to keep it in our mind. So we always try to think, again, we're not archivists without borders. We're not trying to fly in and rescue, or whatever. And there's a lot of that. What's the next thing that we would do, and how can we try to create that together? I mean, and not making assumptions and being very honest. I would say that one of the amazing things about Ghana was that if we had made the assumption that the fact that the library had no media, no DVDs, and did not have any of their regular office files backed up, that there wasn't sufficient IT. In fact, they had a fantastic IT department. And it was just a question of resources. And we were able to work and do this audio digitization project together, where it was one of the first instances of the library having a digital repository. But weren't offering media in the library. They didn't have the capacity. So I think that you have to watch their assumptions. That if somebody is under-resourced, that doesn't mean they're under-resourced in all areas, or they're not looking for ways to solve problems. You know what I'm saying? So that's, I think, one thing about it. Another thing is in Latin America, we were fortunate because we had a lot of Spanish speakers, and we really tried to figure out how to negotiate those things. So I think not making assumptions, being really honest and listening are really, I mean, it sounds trite, but I don't know how else to say it. Sometimes you can feel like you're doing something really wonderful in a country, but you're working with the wrong organization because that organization is not going to change. They're not going to hire people. And so part of the partnerships for Apex, I think, is looking for places where change can be affected and not trying to always partner with the first thing that comes to your mind, but learning something about the landscape. And you have to have trusted people to do that. Does that help?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like any of these things we could talk about for an hour. I think that's a bit.
Yeah.
Um, I have one more question, which was, I guess, yeah, I mean, you spoke a bit about this at the beginning of your talk, and I wanted to give you, I guess, some space to maybe talk about how, given your activist and community organizer background, yeah, how you think that's informed your practice and career, how you've seen maybe see audiovisual archiving preservation as a vehicle for social justice and restorative justice and activism.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we did at MIAP was we looked for making sure that we weren't just working with big institutions, but we were working with a lot of individual filmmakers and activist organizations, as well. So, like I was saying before, when you're going into a place, you have to know who's working on what, and it's a hard thing to do. But so you're looking, so I would say just don't rush it on that. But I guess I'll just say that right now I'm working on training people to document ICE incidents, immigration, where they're picking up people in the States, as I'm sure you all know. You probably have experience with that as well. And the interesting thing about that is after all these years of working with archives, we realize we don't want to be an archive or have to be an archive, that we're in fact a conduit for that documentation going to the family or the lawyer, and we're not creating an archive. So it's really interesting to be in that situation and realize that, and not automatically going to like, oh, we have to do like an indie media archive of what's happening. I think, again, if you think as a community organizer, you're thinking, what is the problem? What is the situation that we're trying to work together to affect here? And so what's the best use of, our knowledge, right? So, and we don't force people. I would say I think it's, sometimes we encourage people to put their things in archives, but then we allow as an option, but it can be a little dangerous to do that, So I think, again, the honesty about what are the pros and cons of your alliances and what are you able to do and what are some of the portals or the places where this can be. But I think thinking about issues of safety, I guess, have been more in my mind lately. So issues of safety, that we would never release anything. We don't release anything in our rapid response group. We don't release it without the person's permission unless it's their back, So we're trying to really tape or record law enforcement. So I don't know. I think, I guess you just have to put a social justice lens on it. I don't know what to say, really. Does that help at all?
I think so. No, I mean, it resonates with me a lot because in terms of the work we're doing at UCL and personally moving out of working within primarily in museum context, institutional museum context, and into a bit more, well, an academic context, but also working to build exactly what you just said, those relationships with Lux, with Cinenova, with London Community Video Archive. The idea that, I guess, recognizing where you have individually or we have individually access to resource, and how we can leverage that to do the most good with that.
I mean, like in terms of honesty, I think you have to, part of our job is, right, to explain that this piece of equipment, if it goes away, this whole group of, room full of tapes is not going to be able to be accessed. So we have to go back to some fundamentals and then also hear what it is that is important to those collection caretakers and the people who are in charge of that collection. So, yeah, again, that's just trying not to make assumptions and recognizing that we're bringing different skills to the table. And so let's try to explain what those skills are and how we look at things that might in a little bit of a different way, why we would look at something that way. Because I mean, just the basic stuff that we talk about all the time, like decks are disappearing, people are disappearing, but it's not in the first, it's not in the mind of a lot of people who have collections who are not in the AV archiving field. So this is what we do. We're archivists and we concentrate on this. And the reason we do that is this.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with your collection,
Yeah. And that's the thing, it's like the first step towards transmitting that knowledge and that memory and yeah, I mean, I think when you were speaking about the emotional impact of this work, it's like it can only happen when it seems like the work we do is very dry and technical, but it's like without that, all of that power, and affect is not possible. So, I think we're out of time, but I don't know, maybe do we have time for any
Oh,
questions?
sorry, but I tried to keep to 25 minutes. Did I do that or
Oh,
did
no, we started late, so it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I think we've run slightly over, so we don't have time for questions. But your questions, Brian, really touched on a lot of questions that at least I had as I was listening, and really kind of brought out so many of the kind of relevancies of the work that Mona's done. So yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you to you both. Thank you so much for both sharing your experience, Mona, but also the generosity and having all these resources available that people can then take and hopefully apply to their own contexts and make this a really generative kind of moment to build on.
Yeah. And run with it and make your own stuff,
Yeah.
and get new ideas and make new stuff and try new things.
Yeah. And thank you as well again, Brian. And thank you, Kate, for captioning. In the moment, we'll send a link with a survey. If you have any feedback or comments, we'd really appreciate that, and we'll take that on board for the future events. And speaking of, we can give you a sneak peek for the next event in the series, which will be on the 15th of July, same time, 5 to 6 p.m. UK, which will be with Anne Adachi-Tatch from Collective Cataloging Japan. So talking about the way that institution, network, connective infrastructure works to specifically preserve and present Japanese experimental moving image. So I hope to see a lot of you there.
We did a CAW in Japan, and so there's overlap there. I'm so happy that Anne is able to come, and so
yeah, we're looking forward to it as well. So hopefully we'll see many of you there. But for now, all it's just left to say is thank you all for joining us today.